Matthew. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. So just to introduce myself, everybody, my name is Eric Clay. I'm the Director of Marketing of Flare, and with me is Mathieu Lavoie. He is our Chief Technology Officer and co-founder. Today, we're going to be talking about leveraging cyber threat intelligence and external cyber risk monitoring. We're going to talk about utilizing the dark web where it matters, augmenting intelligence by pivoting across different illicit communities, both on the clear and dark web, making sure that you have good coverage for data leaks and data exposure, unintentional and intentional, integrating cyber threat intelligence and external cyber risk monitoring findings into your broader security program, and building external monitoring into your risk modeling, compliance, and incident response. So to get started, Matthew, we're going to talk about leaked credentials, which we've talked about very extensively before. Can you tell us a little bit about leaked credentials and the threat they pose to organizations, and then kind of the different types and how organizations should be dealing with it?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Yeah, I think that the whole point here is to how we can say something different about the leaked credential and how we can explain how company can get value out of it. Like for a lot of people out there, it's a bit obvious of like, hey, you download the name leak, you have the big breach, you download the database, you reset the password, you send a quick reminder to your employee that don't use corporate emails on non-corporate systems. But that's mostly under control for all of the company. And really where it's mattering, why we're talking again about leak credential is there's a lot of value on doing the extra mile. And that's why I usually explain the leak credential in 5 categories. The name leak, so the leak that you heard in the news that you see all over the place, you know how to download it, you deal with it, usually under control. The collection, so basically a collection is a regroupment of the leak, and basically the goal is to archive as much as credential as possible and have the biggest collection possible of credential, and to put that into one big archive. It's valuable to pass to those one, but I mean, it's usually a lot of reusing and it's not super valuable. Like yes, you should look into it. You may find 1 or 2% of those leak credential being useful and not being something you've seen already in the past. But really, that's the 2 categories that we are mostly used to see are not necessarily the most valuable. The 3rd category that it usually fits into is what I call the combo list. And why I think combo lists are way more interesting than the first 2 categories is for multiple set of reasons. Is because they are the first one is because they are actively being used by malicious actor to do some account takeover. So basically, a combo list is a short list, a few hundred to a few thousand rows of high value or high hit rate username and password. And why they are so efficient is because cybercriminal will organize them in what we call the 3 axes. So first of all is the geographic region. So if the target, the company, the organization is being targeted by credential stuffing in order for the cyber criminals to get some accounts, to do some account takeover, they will reuse breach that are in the same region. So basically, it's North American SaaS platforms, you most likely have more chance to reuse leak credentials are coming from organizations that got leaked from the same geographic than to use, for example, one breach that happened in Asia or Indonesia or something. So it makes sense. I mean, it's a bit obvious. The second vertical is really about what is the industry. If the cyber criminal is targeting a cryptocurrency exchange, that person will reuse existing breach that occurred into other exchange. So basically, it's a bit of a logical as well. You're targeting financial industry, you'll use like financial accounts that have been breached in other breach. If you're targeting the gaming industry, you'll use other that are coming from gaming site. That's kind of the obvious, but again, it make it really, really efficient to split that between industry, also geographic region. And the 3rd axis is the behavior. So I mean, cyber criminals will look into who are my prime target, who are reusing the same password over and over and over at different places. So they will look at all the different leaks, split that between the first 2 axes, and then they will look into all of those potential prospects, and they will see what are the behavior of those people. Are they using password? And the one that are most likely to reuse password, they will be at the top of the list. That's a little bit how they've been thinking, but that's how, on a defensive point of view, you can get a lot of value. because that's exactly your at-risk person that have been identified in those combo lists. And it's usually fresh credential because I mean, they are efficient. So cyber criminals are using them as a high value target at the moment. So they're usually a little bit more fresh credential that like 10 years leaks that we've seen in the past, but also identify some employees that are at risk, and we have a clear indicator of a potential confirmation, and that's actionable. That's the whole key. Yeah.
So for example, if you had an accountant at a software company and their credentials are found on a combo list, maybe for QuickBooks or something like that, a malicious actor, or maybe QuickBooks and a bank account, the militia and the malicious actor could see they've reused these credentials across multiple platforms. The malicious actor could then go and try some different business bank accounts to see if they could hack a business account. So it's kind of like making educated guesses by correlating these disparate data sets.
Exactly, and I mean that this is why those lists are way more interesting, because there is some thinking process behind, and that you can leverage and reuse the same thinking process for a defensive approach and make it more actionable. Also, I mean, while we are speaking of that, the credential are a gold mine of pivot on the data. Looking at who have the same password, you can probably identify a whole set of email that are being owned by the same person or the same entity. And using the same email format, there's all kind of pivot that you can do there that's enable you to have a better context of who's being targeted, why, what are the different behavior, and who's at risk. And I mean, we always kind of undermine that, but being able to pivot on the hash or the clear text password, if they are available in the breach, it's super powerful. And while I was getting to the extra mile, the two last category are really aligned with that. So now we have the two first, collection and name leads, they are under the control. We have the combo list, we do a little bit more of analysis because there are more insight you can get it, there's more value, there's more actionable information you can do aside of just resetting the password. The last two are infected device. So looking into what are the infected devices that are being sold into the illicit market, and use like those machines, if they contain safe password, they will be available in part of the public domain, which make it a little bit more complicated because it's harvesting one-to-one machine. So basically you need to parse and you need to ingest a ton of data to be able to find, okay, on that machine, those are the safe passwords, safe username and password. It's super valuable because they are usually a little bit less visible in terms of leaks, and therefore they could be more useful and last longer for cyber criminals. So looking into what are the infected devices, what are the samples, what are the different lists that are being shared. I mean, we'll pass through it, but there's a lot of the community where those bunch of the dump of infected machine are being shared freely and openly, and you can get millions of machine by looking into those into this community and being able to parse those million of infected machine and extract the username and password will definitely give you edge. They will definitely help you get to the extra mile where the value is. The last category of leak credential is really about what we call the smaller breach collection. So basically the idea is non-targeted attack. So cyber criminals gets in, do a non-targeted attack, use some tooling in order to scan or to try to dump all of the websites that are available out there. They usually organize it by geographic region. So those are the 50 websites, smaller websites that are ending by .ca or by .us that have been able to automatically dump the content of the database with using automated tools. The challenge here is it's not a lot of entry, not a lot of row, not a lot of result per site. It's usually smaller site. You'll get maybe 100 of rows, 1,000 of row if you're lucky. But I mean, that's a lot of processing of information for only a few leak credentials that you can harvest there. So you really need to have a tool in place to be able to ingest that automatically and harvest those smaller collection of local breach site and be able to ingest that and do that extra mile. Again, same thinking process. It's more difficult to do, more processing to do. So it will get you to the extra mile and will basically identify leak credential and actionable information that could be useful on the longer term for cybercriminal.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about, so let's go back one and talk a little bit more about infected device markets. So we recently wrote a research report on this. If anybody's interested, you can look at our report on the website, flare.systems, the Stealer malware ecosystem. But basically what happens is malicious actors will infect computers like laptops, desktops, etc., with malware. Redline and Raccoon, if I'm not mistaken, are the two most common, Matthew.
There is two, yeah.
And
Sam can
then they'll
probably complement as well the list in the chat, but yeah, Raccoon and Redline are Redline is really the most popular, I think.
and then they'll put these infected devices up for sale, often with all of the different safe browser logins, and actually enable malicious actors to, a malicious actor could buy one for $15. They could, see, oh, this is logged into 200 accounts, financial services accounts, etc. And in a lot of cases, actually be able to use it to bypass two-factor authentication controls in the cases where the user has set their the SaaS application to remember their browser. Can you tell us a little bit more about infected device markets and the value in monitoring them?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely like, I mean, if that machine is on that market, that means that at some point there was remote code execution on that machine. So a malicious actor being able to run code at the machine. So if by looking into the domains and the cookie and the safe password that are available on the machine, it looked like it contained internal domains or internal system, well, you have a good hint that you have one endpoint in your internal network that is being compromised. Again, it's always kind of a cat and mouse. So basically, I was joking with you, Eric, and saying like it's kind of a playing guess who. It's like what is my machine that visited this website, this website, this website, this website in the last 30 days per se, and really being able to kind of close the one and get to the potential suspect that are maybe that can, what we've seen with our clients, it can go down at like 10 to 5 potential machine. So that really reduced the scope. So first of all, like the first thing you should do is there any sensitive domains, any internal domains that are being listed on those market? Because if so, there's an indication of compromission that we have remote code execution by a malicious actor in your environment. So that's thing number one. Then thing number two, you need to look at what are the different machines there. Is there any clients? Sometimes it gives you more like a trend to have more or less infected machine that could be target, like that could be clients of your organization, and you can make some analytic and correlation based on that. But that's a little bit more on the macro level. But really also what is interesting, what we see with cyber criminals is there's a lot of like tooling in place in those communities to be able to make the fingerprint of the infected machine. And the reason why it's so is because, I mean, if the victim click safe password, there's some good chance that the victim also click remember my device on the website, which means that if you're able to make the fingerprint, well, you'll probably be able to circumvent a lot of the protection in place, and basically being able to reuse directly the safe username and password that you got by buying the access to the machine or getting access to the machine.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just as an example, this is somebody purchasing a browser fingerprint on one of the marketplaces, and it's so commoditized. It's almost as simple as shopping on an e-commerce website. So no, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about third-party exposure. Can you tell us a little bit about the value in monitoring ransomware blogs and how they can enable you to identify where you may have third-party data breach or third-party problem?
Yeah, quickly, just a quick reminder, like when we talk about double extortion, triple extortion, usually the double extortion is the fact that you put this data in sale. So the first extortion is getting the data and like saying, hey, I have your data, I'm asking for ransom. The double extortion, to put more pressure, is publishing those data to put more pressure. And when we talk about triple extortion, either disrupting the course of normal business. So, I mean, for those who were located in the US, you probably remember the Colonial Pipeline, where it was difficult to kind of supply gas all across the country. But also what we see as another third-party exposure is publishing the file listing. And why cybercriminals are publishing the file listing if they're already publishing the files? And that's a really good question. And the answer to that is, have you ever tried to download terabyte of data over Tor. It feels like downloading terabyte of data over a 1990 internet. It will last forever, and that's exactly what we see on when you look into those different sites. You see, when they show you the number of download and number of click, it's usually a surprising low number, and that's only the people that try to download it, and probably not the one that actually succeed of downloading of data. So, I mean, yes, the information is available. Yes, the file listing is available, but by publishing the file listing without having to download the archive, it put more pressure because the file listing will disclose some sensitive information. They will disclose some corporate relationship between organizations. Let's say you have like a legal folder with a contract between two organizations. It show the indirect exposure of the breach to third party. And that's really key because the play there, or the game here, is to put, as I'm speaking as a ransomware group, is to put some pressure on the victim, but also leverage the business part of that victim in order to put some pressure as well on them. And by publishing the file listing, what you get is you get organization A that is being victim of a ransomware attack, and then you got organization B that is being indirectly impacted because there's some data, they have some business relation between A and B, and B get the notification that, hey, my data is being indirectly exposed to the breach of organization A. Therefore, I'll call organization A and say, what is happening? Like, what's your plan on this? Are you planning to pay the ransom? And again, it put more pressure. And I mean, we do suggest our clients, and like we were working with the clients to give them the hints that, hey, you may have an indirect breach, but really the goal here is to get the information before it's actually being disclosed by the victim organization to their partner, and using that additional time in order to prepare of like, what are the potential, what are the private data of my organization that I sent to this the organization being victim, what are the different connection and exchange of data and data flow that we have between our two organizations, and being able to prepare in order to have a better view of how you will contain and how you will respond to that. I mean, what we do observe is we know when you have two organizations that are exchanging data, there is a legal contract that has been signed. In those legal clauses, there is a clause about like disclosure of the data breach, and like you should disclose the data breach into. But what we really see is usually the notification is sent before, with the type of system that we have in the monitoring system that of looking into those ransomware blogs. It's sent before that actually the legal notification is sent. So that gives you a heads up, a little bit more time.
Yeah, so it's it's kind of a fine line though, right? So you want to know if you have potential third-party exposure as early as possible, because then you can go and review, what IT systems did the third party have access to? Did they have, what kind of data did the third party have access to that could have been compromised? But at the same time, you don't want to play the malicious actors game and then start calling the company in question, beyond telling them that they may have an issue, which they probably know about by that point. You don't want to put pressure on them to pay the ransom and basically play the game that the malicious actors are trying to get you to, which is to help you extort the company in question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so where do we see ransomware going in the future, Mathieu?
That's a really good question, Eric, because one prediction that I have on my side, and I mean, that's more as a personal prediction, and unfortunately it's not a good prediction, but I mean, is we see a lot of the state actor attack, sophisticated attack, APT group passing to using one company as a springboard to get to another company. So really, you want to target company A, that company A is doing business with company B, you get into companies B, and then you're able to use and leverage the knowledge and the existing data flow and the existing trust that exists between those two relationships to get into your target victim. In that case, what we see in the prediction that we have is right now, what we see ransomware group is operating on a one-to-one basis, getting into one company, getting in that company, and usually it's a long process. Like you see that usually it took like 237 days to identify and almost 90 days to contain. So that means that the group have a lot of knowledge, a lot of footprint inside the company of like they are able to get a lot of information, a lot of credential, a lot of API key, a lot of understanding what are the process, what are the structure, what is how these is organized, and use. And right now, what we see, they don't necessarily use that information to pivot into other company. We really see getting out this information and asking for ransom. Unfortunately, the prediction that we will see, that we do right now, is we will see more and more ransomware group getting into company A and then using to move laterally into companies B and C and D and etc. So reusing the know-how that they accumulated by breaching one company in order to pivot to another company.
No, that absolutely makes sense. Well, on that happy note, let's switch to talking about broader illicit communities beyond the dark web. So one of the trends that I think we've talked about pretty extensively before is a lot of malicious actors are switching to instant messaging platforms like Telegram, Discord, Jabber. Can you tell us a little bit about why that change is occurring, and talk about what that means for security teams who are trying to monitor, maybe that are traditionally monitoring dark web forums and dark web marketplaces, but don't yet have eyes on Telegram and these other platforms?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I'd say there's two reasons why, and then after I'll cover why you should look into all of those companies. So there's two main reasons that we think that motivate the switch to those instant messaging platform. First of all, is ease of use. It's easier to share proof, to share multimedia content than it is to share it on the forum. It's also more stable, more reliable than a forum that is up and down, that we have no idea where it's hosted on, what is the hosting system, that is being DDoSed all over the time, that is basically running on the Pinsum 4 in the closet somewhere. Like it's really those type of situation that we may see historically into those different forums that are keep moving. And we saw that cybercriminal moving to something that is a little bit more easy to share evidence of multiple mediation. It's more reliable. And they will pick instance management platform that have privacy policy that are really strict, that they don't disclose anything whatsoever of the nature of the activity. And that's why we see Telegram being kind of the central piece at the moment in terms of those in terms of illicit activities. We see activities as well on Discord, Jabber, QQ, WeChat. Like it's not exclusive to Telegram, but really we see a focus on Telegram right now. The other second point of why those instant messaging platforms are so popular, we think it's because it feels ephemeral. So when you push something, when you publish something on forum, it feels like it's there forever and everyone can see it. And it's basically part of the public archives on the internet. As for instant messaging platform, the feeling is more that you see the member list, you see who receiving that message, and this message will most likely disappear in the message flow and in the data flow. So this concept of having it ephemeral, we see that we see some cyber criminals to open up and tend to be more verbose on those platforms and take a little bit more risk, and because they feel that it's a bit more ephemeral in terms of data retention.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, too, Mathieu, to think about it not in terms of just having, just monitoring Telegram or just monitoring the dark web, et cetera, but it really is kind of a whole ecosystem, right? So if you're just monitoring one platform or one community, the actors aren't usually just staying in one community, right? They may have a marketplace on the dark web, and then they're referring people there using Telegram, and then maybe sharing samples via Pastebin. So it's really important to get kind of the holistic and comprehensive view, as opposed to just kind of myopically focusing on one area.
Totally agree with you. I think that's you summed it right in a way that looking at one place, you only have a partial view and you don't understand the context and the interaction of different cyber criminals together, and you're missing a big part of the picture. So yes, looking in, like we see that even looking like, and I'm pushing the statement here, even looking at GitHubs where cyber criminal can push some piece of code. We've seen some OTP bot being shared on GitHub. We've seen some sample of malware. We're talking about Redline. We've seen some distribution of Redline on GitHub and on Discord and all of those platforms. So yes, it's important to look at the holistic level for those type of information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to talk about Pastebin, because Pastebin is, is kind of a dual risk, right? So on one hand, you may have employees inadvertently sharing data that they shouldn't be on Pastebin. And on the other hand, malicious actors also often use it. Can you talk a little bit about how malicious actors use Pastebin, and then how companies should be thinking about it in terms of data leakage and monitoring?
We talk about Pastebin because it's one of the most popular, but there's plenty of paste site. I mean, the one that you see at the bottom is on private bin, so it's not like, yes, Pastebin is one important place to look, but also like even the GIS from GitHub is considered as a paste site, like having a way where you can just push some text anonymously. And it's important because, again, it's coming back to the concept of getting all the knowledge and getting all the actionable information there. So leveraging the image that are being shared, leveraging the data that is shared. And I mean, those sites are being used for legitimate reason, but they're also being used for malicious purposes. And even in a way to continuously monitor it is important, because those examples or sample may be taken off rapidly. So it's important that you get the information and then you have a notification as soon as something happened, because there's a time frame where you'll be able to get a sample and get the actual actionable piece of information, as opposed to if you're looking at your archive and the proof is not there, there's not so much you can do with the information that will be provided by Cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to say, I saw somebody raise their hand. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to either Sam, our researcher, will answer them, or we'll talk about them at the end of the presentation. So moving on to data leaks and external cyber risk monitoring. So can you talk a little, so you've already mentioned GitHub a bit. So there's a lot of different ways that data can leak about on GitHub. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance of monitoring GitHub?
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about GitHub, but we take it as an example. I think the main point that we want to do it is there's a ton of information, and there is good exposure, there is bad exposure. Hopefully what we're doing here today, Eric, is good exposure for Flare. But what we'll be looking with the platform, ideally is bad exposure. So we really kind of it's normal that companies' data and exposure is being outside. What you really want to know is it acceptable that our financial statements are published on this system? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's a public company and like they need to be published on those platforms. Sometimes it's not. And that's kind of the main challenge that we have here with GitHub, but with also other platforms, is what is open source project and piece of code that are being shared with the community and actually worth being there, and what are the internal code base or secret that shouldn't have been there, that have been leaked accidentally by an employee. And I mean, that's an important part of it. Like when you look on the open web, you really need to take the approach that it is accidental data leakage. There's not necessarily a malicious intention of it, and you need to take that in account when you're doing your intervention. But for example, from if we go back to GitHub, the problem that we see is if you're copying it and only getting the data flow and not doing anything more, you're basically moving noise around. Like you're copying noise from those platform and into the platform that are being used to monitor those activities. So really it's about like, yes, I have like 10 mentions of the company, but is it in the same repository? Is it the same person? Is it the same employee? Is it the same project? Is it the same file that being modified 10 times? And being able to kind of regroup that and say, hey, this is important. This is tied up together. This is one issue. It's the main key to do to be able to reduce the noise. The second approach and the second step you should do is, what are the secrets? Why do I think this shouldn't be there? Why should I think this is bad exposure? And that goes into really kind of being able to detect some secrets and say, we will show you this one quickly. It will in priority because we think it contains sensitive information. This is what we detected. So that's a little bit of the approach where it enable you to monitor abroad without necessarily moving noise around.
Yeah, so I think it's worth noting too, Mathieu, that in a lot of cases, malicious actors are monitoring for this stuff too. So it's almost a race to see who gets to the valuable information first to fix it. I think we actually had a customer example with that, where they identified an issue with GitHub and remediated it very quickly because they were monitoring it with Flare's platform. But then a couple hours later, they saw malicious actors trying to use that data to get into their environment.
And we can take even more and more like generic example with SolarWind, where there was a username and password, a default username and password that was shared on GitHub. I mean, it does happen, and there's a reason why you do that. So really being able to be proactive in terms of those data, but the challenge is how you be proactive if you have 10,000 of alert per day. How can we reduce that to 10?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing we wanted to talk about in terms of data leakage and external cyber risk monitoring, and this was a new one to me, is these kind of scanning tool archives and how they save PDFs and data that's uploaded to them. So this one, when you were showing this to me the other day, I thought it was really interesting. So the screenshot below, the Humana screenshot, was actually, we were just looking through these websites. They're totally open source. They allow you to scan for viruses, et cetera, in files. And people upload things with their social security number, full names, full addresses, and they're just like publicly available online for anybody on these sites. Can you tell us a little bit about this, Matthew, and kind of the value in monitoring these?
And even more than that, Eric, sometimes it's about like free antivirus software that basically what they do is they upload that automatically on those websites to scan your file when you access it. So even sometimes you don't even know that those files are being pushed on those websites because it's an automated process, either scanning the URL, scanning the file, scanning, like you see the pattern. So really it's about, like, where the most popular that comes in mind to a lot of people is VirusTotal. And I mean, that's also the case. When you upload something on VirusTotal, it's being part of the sample. The good thing with VirusTotal is it's somewhat expensive to download the file, and due to the business model that is limit the distribution of those files. But again, even looking at the file name, even looking just like the example that we've seen on top, like just looking at the file name, you can see that it's somewhat information that shouldn't be there. And that is kind of a new era where it looks like legitimate tools, and it is legitimate tools. The thing is, when you share a sample, is being scanned, and the result of the scan is being archived with the data that have been uploaded. And in that data, it does most of the time content, well, it can contain some sensitive information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how can companies effectively, obviously they could use a platform like Flare to automatically monitor, but are there any ways that you could manually monitor for this kind of leakage?
There is. I mean, thinking about like a search engine, the job of a search engine is looking around all over the place. So if you're what we usually call dorking, is basically having, for example, if we take the example of Packet Total, that's a really good example, because basically that's a service online where you can upload a PCAP, and it will dissect the PCAP and analyze the PCAP for you and give you all kind of information, but is being also indexed by Google. So if you use semicolon packettotal.com and your domain name, well, basically you will end up with some results that are PCAP related to your company that have been uploaded there. So yes, you can do it on a manual way, even with just leveraging some search engine, you'll get some decent result. Most of those sites usually have an API where you can look and get the feed, and that's the next step. Like after you use some search engine, connecting to the most relevant one through API and getting the feed is the next logical step.
Excellent. And so let's talk about integrating cyber threat intelligence and external cyber risk monitoring into your broader security program. So we have this graph here. So you can use internal knowledge about your company to enrich your external monitoring approach, and then use your external monitoring to then validate your cybersecurity program. Can you talk a little bit about that and how companies can do that on a strategic and tactical level?
Yeah, I think the idea here is you're probably the people working in a company and managing the security and the IT of the company is probably the one that have the biggest knowledge of the company. But at the same time, you don't want to be blind with your own perspective on it, and you want to have a new set of eyes on it. So how you can leverage the knowledge you have internally to an external scanning tool or an external monitoring tools in order to discover external footprint or external data exposure that you weren't necessarily aware of. And that's kind of the idea here. And that's why we propose it as a feedback loop of like, tell me what you know. I'll try to tell you something that you don't know. That is really kind of the main idea here. And basically what you know is asset inventory, is what are the critical third party. So looking as well, and we're talking about third party breach, key people, past incidents or knowledge in your industry. What are the incidents? What are the IUC that you want to monitor? What are the past incidents and incidents response you made? Share, put that knowledge into the platform to either partially or fully. There's some way to actually just give some hint to the platform, and the platform will try to take from that starting point in order to discover something else. So shadow IT, undocumented domains asset, what is shadow IT, and data exposure. And really the goal is when you identify something, is tied it up to why it's there. So yes, I have a sensitive piece of information like the marketing strategy that's being uploaded on Trello. Why is that? So tied it up to what's the process, who done it, why they do so, they have the tool internally, no, oh, that's why they use Trello. Okay, do you have a corporate subscription to those type of platform where you can enforce that that the data on those platforms is not listed or actually private? So all kind of really the goal is to identify what is the source, the process, the human error, and otherwise, is this malicious and is it tied up to a potential incident?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And finally, we're going to be talking about risk modeling, compliance, and digital footprint monitoring. So one of the things I've thought when you're looking at external risk, especially if you're looking across, you're using a tool and monitoring repositories, dark web mentioned, leaked credentials, Google mentions, case counts, is you can actually start to get an idea of your organization's kind of holistic digital footprint and what your external exposure looks like. Can you talk a bit about that, about how companies can use that to kind of measure their risk over time?
Yeah, and I mean, the risk is a double-sided sword. So I mean, it can still help you. It can help you prioritize, but the main idea here is to get the company more secure, is not to improve the score. So really the score is an indicator of like how we perceive you and how we think you should evolve. But really, I mean, it's a bit tricky. The score in cybersecurity is always a bit tricky. I mean, it's how relevant it is and how we can use it, how the technical team can use it in order to back their saying and make some change in the company. So I mean, that's how it should be used. I think quantifying it help you prioritize. I mean, prioritization is an internal risk that is sort of on a descendant order. So it does help you kind of tackle what we think are the main issue based on our analysis, but you should always base the fact that it's your score and you should try to improve it, but also keep in mind that it's the tools and it's not a game. Like it's the score should be a tool for you to be more secure and not necessarily to optimize the score.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And how does external monitoring usually fit into external cyber risk monitoring specifically? How does that typically fit into compliance?
I mean, it does fit in compliance. I mean, we see a lot of framework that ask for continuous monitoring. I put my technical red teamer hat and like I've been fighting for that into big corporation about like compliance is not necessarily security. I think compliance drives security, but compliance is not security. You can be compliant and not secure. You can be secure and not compliant. But I think there's definitely a relationship where compliance will drive you to the best behavior. And I think for a platform like external monitoring and from an external point of view, it definitely help you into identifying, so identify, detect, and response as well. So I mean, it won't necessarily help you to recover. I don't think that we have a case there, but definitely it will help you to, first of all, being compliant to some of the requirements talk to PCI DSS, etc., that are in place. But they will either be able to identify potential threat and help you to the response to incident response.
Excellent. And yeah, let's finally talk about incident response. So, from my point of view, external cyber risk monitoring could tell you if you have an incident, right? If you find out you have an infected device on Russian market or Genesis market, that's probably an incident right there. Can you speak a little bit more about how monitoring your digital footprint or your external cyber risk can really enable your incident response process, whether that's identifying incidents or providing context for incidents you already have?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's the same idea of the feedback loop is, again, it could be the trigger. of an incident response, but most of the time is an helper into the incident response. So when you do have some insight from the incident response crisis, can you leverage, can you find some potential hypothesis? So basically when you're in incident response, there's all kind of door you can open. And that's the tricky part, to prioritize those door of like where to look into. So having those type of system where you can feed the information, it can help you to give you some hint of like, I have seen those type of external data externally, so it can point you to one door more than another. It won't tell you open like go path number 3 and then go path number 4, but it will definitely help you being able to prioritize and to pick one more than another. So I think it's, again, the feedback loop of like pushing some knowledge that you have from the incident response to the platform will give you some insight. You can use that insight to make a decision, and then again do the same process.
All right. Well, I think that's our webinar, everybody. Thank you so much for participating. If anybody has any questions, we will be around to answer them in the Q&A chat. Just so everybody knows, Flare can help you by unifying your approach to external cyber risk monitoring. So Flare automatically monitors GitHub environments, thousands of illicit communities across the clear and dark web, including illicit communities on Telegram. Data leaks, so paste sites. We really are a unified approach to helping you monitor your digital footprint and identify external exposure over time. We use custom identifiers that automatically search across billions of data points to identify potential issues and then prioritize them. So again, thank you everybody for coming.